So you have a couple of different like standard vampires. I mean, your older vampire is basically more of a demonic entity than like a person. As you guys were saying, like he doesn't like just calmly drink the blood of beautiful women as he does in movies. He kind of just wants to kill you. Similar to earlier werewolves. And it's very typically the same kind of deal where this being makes some kind of deal with the devil and then he gives them these abilities in return and they're evil, which is why they're afraid of silver and other shit that you have like that. So from what I understand, like your European vampire kind of originates either in Rome or in Romania, depending. There's like the Eastern vampire that's called the Strigoi, and he's some kind of bizarre creature that's a vampire. And then your Roman one, he's kind of like, if you read in the Bible, it talks about like satyrs and all these creatures out in the woods that are never really explicitly like detailed or anything. They're just kind of on the fringes waiting. It's kind of how it is from what I recall. And then I had a student one time write me a term paper about South American vampires, which was really, really cool because she was Hispanic and she was like, "Can I write about, these legends that I heard when I was growing up in Central America?" I was like, well, yeah, of course, I want to hear them. And there were a couple different types there, like a weeping woman that takes that shape to kind of lure you in. And when you go to comfort her, find out what's wrong, she just kills you. And the other one that was really interesting, I don't remember what it was called, but it was some type of entity where it detaches its head and its head like flies around and hunts. And the way that you kill it is that you have to find where its body is hidden while its head is separated. And then when you destroy the body, then you can destroy the head when it like comes back to that spot.
So, what I discovered on the internet, which I guess we can take with a grain of salt since you can't trust everything that's on the internet, is that the legend of vampires, or one of the legends of the vampires on where they originally originated, began in the Mediterranean, all thanks to some jealousy between gods and humans. So it begins with, your main individual, your human initially, Ambrogio. I think that's how you pronounce it, who was a young adventurer from Italy who traveled to the city of Delphi, Greece. And this location was home to the Temple of Apollo, which was the sun god. And it was here where Ambrogio originally received the warning from what was known as the Oracle that the curse, the moon, the blood will run. Well, he didn't really understand what this cryptid saying or advice meant, so he kind of just didn't really think anything of it. And when he was leaving the temple, he came across the sister of the oracle named Selene. Ambrogio and Selene had fallen madly in love almost upon contact, love at first sight type deal. And they were due to marry, but unfortunately there was a unlikely opponent who stood in the way, which was Apollo, the sun god. He was pretty smitten with Selene as well, seeing how she was actually considered one of his maidens that helped take care of the temple. So he was outraged at the fact that Ambrogio wanted to take her away and marry her and, live happily forever after. So he kind of stood in the way of that. So the night before they were supposed to ride away in the daytime, morning, sunset, whatever you want to call it, to go get married, Apollo placed a curse upon the young man, making it that if he sets foot in the sun, that from that day forth, the mere touch of Apollo's sunlight would burn his skin. The next morning, he was distraught the fact that he couldn't leave with his wife because he couldn't, step out into the sunlight. So he took refuge in a cave, which ironically led to the lair of Hades, the god of the underworld. So, um, out of desperation, he went there, seeking a way in which him and his future bride could seek out refuge away from Apollo's gaze, because obviously Apollo had it out for him. So he's like, okay, I'll strike a bargain with you. If you can steal the silver bow of Artemis along with all, I think it was 13 arrows, I'll give you guys refuge down here in the underworld where you can live your life happily and peacefully. Well, Artemis is actually the sister of Apollo, and she is the goddess of the hunt and the moon, which is going to be significant later on. Meanwhile, during this time, Ambrosio was attempting to make contact and explain his situation to Selene by hunting swans. And this is kind of where the whole idea of sucking blood came from, because the fact that he would drain the swans of their blood to use as ink and use, obviously a feather like little Quilton, to write letters in blood, which is kind of gross but kind of sweet at the same time. Shows, dedication. But he kind of knew that at this point he wasn't going to be able to steal the bow from Artemis. So he went to her trying to offer as tribute one of his kills, a swan. But when he went to go and use his final arrow that he had in order to kill the last swan, he blatantly misses. Like, how unfortunate is that? So, Artemis, being a goddess of the hunt, took pity on him for him being, a hunter trying to, show his tribute. She offered him her bow and one single arrow in order to successfully kill this swan and then offer it as tribute. But when he went to go and use his final arrow that he had in order to kill the last swan, he blatantly misses. Like, how unfortunate is that? So, Artemis, being a goddess of the hunt, took pity on him for him being, a hunter trying to, show his tribute. She offered him her bow and one single arrow in order to successfully kill this swan and then offer it as tribute. She had no idea really what else was going on. But out of desperation, typical, human behavior, he instead takes the arrow and the bow to Hades, which Hades isn't pleased by this because he's like, hey, I said all 13 arrows where you only gave me one, so she still got the other ones. And also he pissed off Artemis in the same time, so with her bow being silver, she cursed him with the inability to hold on or touch or anything silver. So that's where, the whole theory of being, allergic to silver comes from. And then Hades, was kind of like, bye, get going. Like, I don't feel bad for you. Like, we're not, I'm gonna take your soul in the process because it's kind of what you were gambling here. So now he doesn't have a soul. He's, allergic to the sun, allergic to silver. What more does this guy have going on for him? This is horrible. All over love, So he then goes and begs for forgiveness to Artemis, pleading that he's sorry, like, he was desperate, he couldn't help it, he really, really needed this protection from Apollo because of, true love, So she took pity on him. She felt sorry for him and ended up giving him a couple of really, really amazing abilities. So since she's the goddess of the hunt, she gave him the ability of being a great hunter, so increasing his speed and his strength. Actually second to hers. Obviously she was going to be first. And then also, ironically, she gave him a beast strength jaw with sharp, like not sharp teeth, but strong teeth. So then that way he doesn't need an actual physical weapon to kill. He can just, rip the throat out of his prey with his own mouth, which then comes from, the whole idea of vampires sucking blood from the neck. So, what she also did in this process, which I don't understand why she necessarily did this, like she seems to be doing this guy a lot of favors at this point, she granted him immortality. So he had 3 curses taken away from him, and then essentially had 4 gifts given to him, if you want to consider immortality a gift. So, but the immortality part was only if him and Selene could escape Apollo's temple and promise that they would only worship Artemis for, the remainder of their lifetime, or in his case, forever. So they attempted to escape Apollo's temple, which they did that night. But what they may have not considered is that Artemis was a virgin god, meaning all of her followers had to remain chaste and unmarried. So essentially when they got there, they couldn't act upon their love for each other. They could just only enjoy each other's company under the protection of Artemis. So that will, later down the line, a couple years down the line, started to kind of backlash on them, or backfire, because Ambrogio wasn't aging. He was immortal, but Selene was. So he desperately went to Artemis yet again and pled to make her immortal, or allow him to touch her, even if it was just one time, because he was afraid that he was never going to be able to touch the love of his life again before she died. So, like the gods in this time period, man, they were wicked and tricksy, if you want to call it. So Artemis goes, okay, I'll strike a final deal with you. You can touch Selene one time. But in doing this, you have to drain her of all of her blood. You have to essentially rip out her neck and suck her blood out. And in this case, if you do that, I will allow you to create other immortals, so aka spread the vampire ability, and Selene will be able to see you again. They kind of vaguely said that. So initially he didn't want to do it, but Selene's like, do it, please. So he ends up killing her, draining her of her blood, and her soul rises up to join Artemis, and she becomes the goddess of the moonlight, or the moon phases. And so it kind of ends really poetically, in the sense of every single night when he can come out from hiding from the sun, Artemis will bestow upon him her rays from the moonlight, and be able to reach down with those rays and hug and touch her lover and his procreations, his children, essentially. And that is kind of the end of this particular story. And that's just one example of where the origin of vampires come from. There are a couple of other ones that are a little bit more obscure and like out there. Like there is also the biblical story of how in the beginning there was Adam and Lilith, not just Adam and Eve. Eve came after, where Lilith was created as an equal to Adam. And in this particular story, so let's take it with a grain of salt here. In this particular story, Lilith tried to essentially kind of dominate or share the dominance with Adam sexually, and he didn't like this, because he's like, no, you were made to be, under me type deal, not superior to me whatsoever. So she's like, well, screw this, man. I'm out of here. And she leaves the paradise. And so God sends 3 angels to go capture her, and she essentially jumps in the ocean, joins the demon king of the ocean, and she then morphs into a demon herself. And so in this case, God play, and this is kind of, a screw you God type scenario. And so he bestows a curse on her. It's all about curses here. He bestows a curse upon her that 100 of her firstborn sons every single day. So this chick supposedly having more than 100 children a day. I don't know how demons work, but I guess that's how that goes. They will all die. They'll all perish. So in return, she fights back and says, all right, then fine. I'm going to go and I'm going to seek out all of the children of Adam and Eve, because then Eve came into the picture, and I'm going to drain them of all of their blood. And I'm going to attack them so that my children aren't safe, your children aren't safe. And this is just like a whole spiteful battle between the two, the two sides of each scenario. So that's kind of what I got. So I know the topic of Vlad the Impaler is going to come up because, of course, that's like the most iconic vampire that, everybody goes to. And especially since I know we're going to be talking about Bram Stoker's Dracula, this is actually where a lot of the ideas and concepts for Dracula came from. So, Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Tepes, was born in Transylvania as the second son of a nobleman, Vlad II Dracul, which Dracul in Romania meant dragon. So I kind of find that funny how it went from being dragon to Dracula, but also dragon being a cryptid type creature, so we won't get into that part. But he was an initiate of a secret order of Christian knights, which I thought was kind of interesting. So he had some kind of religious background with him and his family. But of course, as a ruler, he became notorious for his brutal tactics that he used against his enemies. I essentially would say that he just ruled through fear. Nobody's going to mess with you if they fear you. And then it's easier to have people follow behind you and follow suit if they trust you as, hey, you're the biggest and baddest out there. So, but there were a lot of theories, and there isn't, contrary to belief, there isn't concrete evidence of this, but but some people believe, and scholars too, believe that Vlad liked to dine amongst the impaled bodies while dipping his bread into the blood of the people that he's killed. So his strong and gruesome torture methods, alongside with these particular bloodbath sightings or thoughts, it arised the popular belief of the vampire tales. Because obviously we already had concepts of vampires before then, but it was that fact that how he was just so archaic in what he did was essentially where people drew that gruesomeness and was like, hey, this is a good story for vampires, kind of like that. There were also other historical figures that represented kind of like vampiric desires or thoughts or actions per se, such as Elizabeth Bathory, I think is how you pronounce it. She was, I believe, a queen at the time. I'm forgetting which country she was from, but she used to bathe and drink the blood of her servant girls and their daughters because she believed it would help her stay young and beautiful. And then if anybody is, American Horror Story fans out there, you already know about Madame Delphine LaLaurie, or yeah, I think that's how you pronounce it, where she would smear the blood of her slave victims where they would like cut out the pancreas and like, or I think it was a pancreas or kidney, and then they'd mash it up because she believed that that had the healing toxin or the healing traits that would keep her young and beautiful forever, and she would smear it on her face. It's a really, really good scene if you haven't seen it, but also just so freaking archaic. Like I can't believe that this was a thing, but these people had to have gotten it from somewhere. So, I mean, that's where we continuously get this thought process of blood plus you equals either eternal youth or immortality.
Legend of the vampire.
I mean, it is one of those things where the stories have been around in the spoken word for forever. Everything is more of like a folklore type thing, folk tales, things to spook children to stay out of the woods by themselves. It's been around for forever, literally immortal for whatever reason. Because it's found in like basically every culture across the globe in one way or another, like you were talking about earlier, Steve. I think like they said the first time it was ever like written down, it's been extrapolated from the French. Everything is extrapolated from the French. A vampire with a Y instead of an I. Or you had mentioned before, Strigoi, which I rewatched Bram Stoker's Dracula because we were talking about that before. So I had to rewatch it. And interestingly enough, Dracula, there's that part where the wolf escapes from the zoo, and for whatever reason they're in the cinema and the wolf is there magically, and I don't quite catch everything that he says, but he straight up basically points right at this wolf and is like, oh, Strigoi, stop, we are friends. Because Strigoi is a vampire, but also not really. It's more of a transformation, a shapeshifter. They're more likely to be an animal form than a humanoid form, which is also confusing. Why do vampires turn into wolves? Are you then a werewolf? Are you a werewolf or are you a vampire? That's what I want to know.
You know, they were kind of like when you cut this deal with Satan, you kind of get both of those abilities in exchange for your soul, which still kind of seems like a bad deal to me.
Except everybody has their time to be burned at the stake. If they're witches, we're staking corpses in the graveyard because we don't understand science. Poor dude's a little too hairy, so he's either got to be a werewolf or we got to stick him in the circus. We don't know what to do with weird people, so we just put them away where we don't see them, or we put them in a place where we can make money off of them.
That was often my question too, was like the whole, like, I remember playing on the Super Nintendo Castlevania, and Dracula could turn into a bat or a wolf. And it was like, how did this come to be? Like, I understand the whole, one bitten by bat, one bit by wolf, that's how your origin story of vampire and werewolf. But, the whole turning into a wolf was kind of interesting because I mean they were already vicious enough as vampires, given their speed and agility and their ability to put you in a trance. Like, why do you need to be a wolf now?
It's kind of like, let's just take all the things humans are the most afraid of and give this guy the ability to turn into them. It's really what it kind of boils down to.
Right.
It's the same with like, why is the devil always a snake? Because monkeys that we're descended from were eaten by snakes. There's a natural enmity between our species. It makes sense that we make him the archetype of evil things.
Also, it wouldn't surprise me if at like some point, like we all have the theories on the domestication of animals. Some wolf at some point probably became vaguely friendly with a people and then turned on them, and they were like, well, it's obviously a person that can shapeshift into an animal that did this. This is terrible. And then like they have all of the things that they think could have been going on. People see some shit. It's got to be some spooky shit. We don't know what science is yet at this point in time. So like there are plenty of instances where people, you know, if you got tuberculosis, blood's coming out of your mouth, you obviously drank the blood, can't be your own blood. People got bubonic plague, they look crazy as hell. They got black spots growing in their armpits, blood flying out of their mouth every time they cough. Gotta be a vampire, gotta burn it, or God forbid, they accidentally buried you before you died. And they were like, hey, I heard screaming coming from under the ground. We should probably do something about that. They wait a few days, so you're dead. So when they rip open your casket, your coffin, whatever they decided to put you in, they see scratch marks on the inside, and they were like, "This is obviously a vampire. He was rising from the dead." And it's like, you'd never checked for a pulse, my dude. Like homeboy was just in a coma for like a week, and you were like, he's obviously dead. And then you buried him, and then the poor dude woke up. Now he's dead.
Well, that's actually exactly what happened a lot back during the times, like, well, with that like epidemic of Connecticut that I was mentioning earlier, not to mention it's the same kind of idea with that you saw in the Salem witch trials of like the first thing that you cannot immediately identify. And mind you, this is back in the 1600s, 1700s, and then the vampire thing was in the 1850s. Scary that that was so fairly recently compared to some of these other things, but anything that wasn't immediately explainable, people were like witchcraft, devil worship, because like you said, science didn't exist yet. So like that actually was a cause for believing in vampires, like, you know, the coughing up blood from certain illnesses. And then another one was that after you died, it looks like, you know, they thought that people's fingernails kept growing or their hair kept growing, but it's really just the skin from your cuticles and your scalp shrinking back and starting to decay, which makes it look like the hair kept growing and that the nails kept growing. It wasn't that they were, it's just that the skin around them was starting to disappear, making it look like they were longer. And so these types of things like made people think, oh my God, they're coming back from the dead. They're still somehow alive, but not fully there. Where that jump between, oh yeah, they're alive to they're eating my family. Back in the 1850s, it happened in Jewett City, which is not sure exactly where it is, but I think it's about like 45 minutes from me. In the 1850s, there was this family, and within, I think, the span of 5 years, all of them died. Every single last one of them. And it was also during the time when tuberculosis was just knocking people off the board left and right. And so one of the sisters, she was the first to die, and she died of what we would now probably diagnose as tuberculosis. So they buried her on the property, and then suddenly, who would have guessed the rest of the family starts to get ill as well? Probably from contagion from her, or just the fact that at the times there's not much you can do with medicine that they have, and this illness is running rampant. So once their family members started to die off, they started to assume, oh shit, maybe it's something having to do with the sister coming back to life, because tuberculosis, one of the big symptoms is that you start to lose weight rapidly. And so they equated this to something is draining these family members of their energy. And so they went to the sister's grave, they exhumed it, and they found those like symptoms. Like it looked like she was covered in blood. She was bloated and miscolored and all like gross looking, when that's actually just natural decay. But that bloating, they assumed that that was because she had been feasting on the blood of her family. You have the other signs, that like longer looking hair, the longer looking nails, all of these things led to them believing that she was somehow rising from the grave every single night and going into the home and feasting on her family. and on townsfolk nearby. And so slowly this grew into a thing of hysteria throughout the town. Kind of like an isolated witch trials that nobody ever heard of, because like it's fucking vampires, and nowadays we know that shit's not real. Versus witch trials, there is some suspicion that there might have actually been some craft going on. Versus this is immediately dismissed, so nobody thinks of it. But this did happen. And so the entire family eventually does end up dying off, but one after another, because they kept getting sick, they kept on, digging up their brothers and their sisters and their aunts and uncles and looking at the bodies and then taking care of the bodies the way that they had seen throughout stories and through what they, not just stories, because the vampire literature had been getting popular, but also like biblical beliefs and everything too, of like they would destroy the body. They would decapitate the bodies. They would turn the skulls over so that they were facing down in the earth when the rest of the body was facing up. They would crack down every single rib, remove the heart, and burn it. They would cut off all the fingers. They would drive a stake in the heart. That's the classic one that everybody knows about. But they did all these things because they believed that this would keep them dead. There were these superstitions that people swore by. And so they did all of these things. They completely destroyed these bodies. And people of Connecticut basically completely forgot about it, because I'm guessing once they figured out what actually happened, that it was just tuberculosis, that it was a horrible circumstance, they were probably a little embarrassed. And so they decided, let's not tell this one at the dinner parties. Like, let's just sort of let this one go. Let's let it slide under the rug. But then in the 90s, I forget how exactly, I haven't read about it in a long time, but something happened where the bodies were discovered again, and they found them in this state. Of course, they're just skeletal remains at this point, but they're like, they all are buried in this really unusual way, in the exact same way. And this is like what we've kind of heard about in all of our favorite like horror stories and everything from classic literature. And so they slowly pieced it together and unveiled that Connecticut had a little vampire crisis that everybody forgot about back in the 1800s.
Yeah, his name was John Barber. That's
Yes.
what the recent, after 200 years or so after his death, they finally used DNA to identify him as John Barber, the farmer.
It was another family too. Like the whole family got wiped out. I forget what their last name was. It was a very, very typical white New England last name. Probably Smith or some shit like that. I just can't remember for the life of me. But like the whole story is actually really sad. The fact that they were so convinced. Did everybody just freeze, or was it just me? I froze. Okay. But just the fact that this entire family was convinced, like, you just gotta have to imagine like the hysterics that they probably went through, because I can't imagine they enjoyed destroying the dead bodies of their loved ones. And that just like speaks to the fear that they were probably experiencing at the time. It's crazy to think about.